All right, awesome. So thank you for joining this July event for the Dynamo user group in New Zealand. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Monica, and I work as the BIM lead at JazzMax, an architecture company here in New Zealand. And I'm one of 6 other organizers of the Dynamo user group. I just so you know, this event is going to be recorded, and the recording will be made available on our YouTube channel. And on the YouTube channel, you can also find all of the recording of the previous events that were held. And we also have a LinkedIn group page for people that want to join, where we share all of the future events when they're coming up, and also share knowledge. So if you feel like you want to be part of it, feel free to join the group on LinkedIn. And today we have John Pierson from the US joining us and presenting. He's the design technology specialist from the Parallax team, and is very well known in the industry for his Revit and Dynamo skills and knowledge. And yeah, today is going to talk to us about a lot of Dynamo's tricks. It's going to show us where Dynamo is right now and where it's going in the future. It will show us how to use the Dynamo player, and if there's some time, it will also show us how to use Dynamo for generative design in Revit. And that's my super very brief intro, and I'll pass over to you, John.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. So let's see. I'll try to share mine. Always with Teams, I have a hard time. So it says, make me a presenter, and I could share. And then for anyone on the call too, in the text in the chat, I put a link to my data set. So if you want to follow along or anything like that, you can feel free to download it and check it out. If you have any questions while we're running through this, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand or however you want to do that. And I assume Monica will help as well with any questions. If you've seen me present before, I like when people ask questions. So even if you ask a question and I don't show anything that I planned on showing, that's a win to me. Like, that makes me happy because you're interested. So that's something that I'm always trying to get from people, is to ask questions. And when I present in person with people, I try to get out there and ask questions and get people to interact and things like that. Just because if you come with something in mind, it's always nice to kind of help out with that if we can help it.
Yeah, awesome. I'll try to keep. Sorry, John. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat because it looks like everybody's muted by default. So yeah, if you just leave a short message or keep an eye, and I'll just unmute people so they can ask questions.
Very cool. Yeah, and feel free to interrupt me too, Monica. I don't mind at all. So let's see. I have a very, very slight slides too. This is a little bit about me, stuff I build. That's not as important. My team, so all the people I work with are right here. We have a team we've been kind of adding to for a while. Aaron started the company and he's a Revit user as well. And all the rest of us do a whole lot of stuff too. So that's a little about us. And we'll go over that one in a second. But if anyone wants to download the data set now, you can do that. So here's the little QR code thing. We'll share it after this meeting, so that way you have it to follow along with the recording. Or you can go to rebrand.ly/JohnDugganZ2021. I always like to start with a slide a little bit about my journey. So I'm a Dynamo user and a Revit user. I wasn't always that way. I actually opened Dynamo for the first time in 2013, and all the nodes turned yellow and red and all kinds of crazy stuff, and it scared me. So I closed it and I was like, I'm never going to learn how to use this. It's not for me. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do it. A year later, I went to Autodesk University in 2014, and I learned it from Marcello Scambaluri's class, which was called Dynamo for Dummies. And from there, I just kind of built upon it. It's interesting because learning Dynamo actually gave my career like a new trajectory to where I do programming now. I build Revit add-ins and things like that for the BIM consultancy that I work for. So it's definitely an interesting thing. So anytime you feel frustrated with Dynamo or think it's hard, don't worry, we've all been there. That's kind of where I want to go with this. And just always try to be persistent and just kind of hammer at it and try it out. So, I mean, even if anyone wants to in the chat, put your experience level with Dynamo. If you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced, that's kind of cool just to get some interaction too. The most important thing is don't get discouraged. Just always keep trying things and don't give up, you know, so that's a very important thing. From 2014 to now, there's been a lot of stuff that I've done within there to get to where I'm at too. So it's definitely doable for everyone. Cool. So we should see Revit now. Perfect. The model that everyone knows, right? So this model is not modified. I included it in the data set so that way you'd have it. But we do have the graphs in there as well. What we're going to do is we're going to actually build a Dynamo graph. We're going to be interactive. I could have showed a whole bunch of slides and things like that, but I wanted to build this along with everyone and work through it. We have an hour, right? That's how long this is? Hour and a half?
Yeah, about an hour. Yeah, I think being in the morning, just be mindfully in New Zealand, people might need to go back to work.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to try to keep this at right at that hour. And then once again, if we don't get through all of the examples or example, we'll send out the data set and all of that. So in this sample file, one thing that we want to go over is we're going to do something that's a little bit more of a geometric problem for this example. In this case, I'm using Revit 2021 with Dynamo 2.6 installed. It's bundled with Revit now. Generally, we're going to be in a 2.0 and up version from now on. So in the past, we had versions like 1.3 and things like that. If you're not on 2.0, it's time to get on it because it works all the way back to Revit 2019. So that's something to keep in mind. A little bit of history of Dynamo in there as well. So what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and go to the Manage tab and open up Dynamo. And I'm going to outline a graph that we're working with just to kind of get this model ready to do some cool stuff with. So what we'll do is we'll our data set. And this won't be all the examples to where they're already built. I just mostly wanted to have one to show some of the capabilities with Dynamo. So generally speaking, when you see a Dynamo graph from me, it's going to be color-coded with groups. Good practice to get into. Always do that if you can. Install packages that are useful. One is Monocle that I built. I want to show what this does real quick. If we go in and we look at nodes, and for anyone who's a little more beginner, these are nodes, which represent lines of code in the Revit API. If we want to hand this graph off to someone, a lot of times we use custom nodes. So all of those nodes that appear in this bottom left corner of Dynamo. It's always nice to tell the next person what nodes we're using. So if you use Monocle, which is available on the package manager, you can actually hit Control-Shift-P on your keyboard and annotate all your custom nodes really quickly. So it tells you what package it's from, what version, and then it'll go ahead and document them. So that's one thing we always want to do. That way people know where these custom nodes came from. So if they open it in a version where they don't have the custom nodes installed, they will know. For what this graph is doing specifically is it's going to load some element types for us. So we're in the sample model. If I go to wall, we'll see that I have kind of all the typical walls that come with the sample model. But I want to load specific wall types into this model to do other things with. We're going to do some randomization stuff just because it teaches us some different management techniques. So what this Dynamo graph does is it allows you to pick a resource file, specify a wall name to load or a wall type to load. It will open that resource file in the background, and then it will go ahead and pull that wall type from that file for you, and it'll load it into your current file. This is really cool for if you have wall types for different construction types in different files, and you can load them into your file. All of this Dynamo graph has notes to try to walk you through it. It's not super complex, as you can see. So just kind of navigate through it. This one's not the tutorial. This was just kind of showing like a what if kind of thing. So it'll copy that wall type from your file. It'll copy panel types, and then it will close that document. So Revit has a method of working with documents in the background. What's even more interesting about this file is it does work with Dynamo Player. So we'll do map to my Dynamo Player folder. And you're able to actually manipulate inputs in Dynamo Player now, which is really nice. So I'm going to load a feature wall, and it's going to be from this resource file, and we'll hit run. So you could kind of see that it's working in the background, and then it gives me a result. It tells me that I loaded 3 panel types, and I loaded 1 wall type that I specified. Within that graph, I actually break down some logic that'll help you out in the future as well. So we have a user enter and feature wall. I always convert it to lowercase and remove the spaces to try to break some of that like bad habits. And that way I match the name correctly. So that's in the file for you to kind of have as well. Funny thing is, Dynamo Player is something that's been around a while, and there's been quite a few presentations on it. And I think that's actually where I really ran into Monica, as well as your Dynamo Player class in BiLT Australia 2 years ago now. So it's kind of cool, and that those resources are out there too for you. There's a lot of great classes. So it loaded some stuff for us. What we can do is, now that we have that loaded, we'll navigate down to this wall that will make a feature wall. And if I navigate, we'll see that we have a new wall type called feature wall. And I'll actually go ahead and I'll just draw it right off the wall because it has a thickness to it. We're just eyeballing this real rough. Go back to 3D, and we'll just kind of. So this wall's not super special. It just has a layout pattern already in there for me, and I pulled some panels in with it as well. So we've had this kind of thing when I worked at an architecture firm, to where we wanted to do some randomization of panels on walls and things like that. So we are able to do that with Dynamo. If you are following along, there's files called beginning, middle, and end as well. So you could kind of jump to the end result if you wanted. So once again, we've loaded that wall type. We'll go ahead and navigate to Dynamo again, and this one will be from scratch. So let's see. Dynamo keeps going on my other screen. And kind of fun thing is, if you're using Dynamo, you'll probably use 2 screens. So the first thing we'll do is we'll make this a Dynamo graph to randomize panels that works with Dynamo Player as well, or just raw Dynamo's UI. So we'll go ahead and click on New. And so the first thing that we always do when we start building a Dynamo graph is we want to select things within Revit. The easiest way to find all of that information is under this Revit bin and selection. Within the selection bin, we have different methods. So we can get things by category, by family types, by types, all sorts of different ways. If we navigate down, we also have ways to select things. So if we place select model element, we'll be able just to select that wall type that we now have, or that wall instance within the project. This select model element's okay because if you're very careful with your selection, you'll get the right thing. But as you can see, I can pick other stuff. Like I picked a model group just now. That's one of those things when building Dynamo graphs for people, you want to try to future-proof it. You want to eliminate any kind of issues that they might have. So we won't use that node in this case. One toolkit that everyone should just install that's from Autodesk that's awesome is called Refinery Toolkits. So it was made for generative design. And you can use it for a lot of really cool workflows to do bin packing and laying out sites and things like that. But it comes with a few other nodes that work with generative design or Dynamo Player. And then install a package, just to recap that. You can go to packages, search for a package, and search it. In this specific case, you would search for Refinery Toolkits. And it's the second one in this case, since I didn't type out the whole word. This is really important because it has an option, and we'll just search it. Select a wall. So we'll do select wall, and we'll see that select wall element is an option. This is really cool because now it won't let me select these trees or anything like that. So while this toolkit was made for something else, we can use these nodes in Dynamo Player to do really cool things. So I'll actually let it force select this wall, and then we'll see that we have the wall selected. So in order for any input to be compatible with Dynamo Player, we need to right-click on it and change it to is input. And in this case, I'll be a little more specific with what I want them to select. So I'll say like select feature wall. And then it will tell us that it's renamed. So this is a new feature in newer versions of Dynamo where it will remind the user what the node name was before. You can actually hover on the node name to see it as well. So it's really nice for when you rename something that your end user knows what to expect. So that's always really good to include if you're in older versions of Dynamo, but newer versions just do it for you, which is kind of nice. So that's a really nice feature. I have my complaints about the yellow thing that looks like an error, but we'll just work past that.
It is one of my best features from the new version of Dynamo.
Yeah, it's like being able to know these things is really good, especially when you're upgrading graphs, right? So that's always really nice. Oh, another thing in the data set that I forgot to include or introduce, and we'll just hit no on this, is I included a template in there. So generally when we build Dynamo graphs at Parallax, we start with a template, and the easiest way to do that is to load the template in this samples folder right here under a folder called template. And then it will appear on your Dynamo home screen under template, and then you can click on it and you now have a boilerplate to start working with. And then hopefully I copied that. Yeah, cool. So now we have that kind of ready to go, and then we can do a save as and actually save this to wherever it needs to go. One working. Name your stuff a little more specifically than that, but you get the point. So once again, this is an input. And now that I have my little color coding graph with Monocle, we can actually hover on this little ink dropper and start to define what nodes do really quickly. In the past, you have to do this very manually where you right click, create group, it creates it as green by default, and the text is huge and all that stuff. So Monocle just helps you do it really nicely. And then there's all these little alignment things that we'll see as we work through this. So we are working with a curtain wall element. So kind of this workflow is a little more unique because it uses custom nodes, specifically from Rhythm, which I build. If we navigate to Rhythm, Revit, Elements, we will have some options in here for curtain panels and things like that. We are going to work with panel types in this, so we will be using some out-of-the-box nodes, though. So let's navigate to those first. So we'll go to Revit, Elements, Curtain Panel, and we'll see that we have a few options. If we hover, it'll give a description of what's going on. This one says by element, it says get all of the panels of a curtain wall, a curtain system, or a sloped glazing. So we now know that it's going to take an element, we'll connect it, and it retrieves all those panels associated with that. This workflow is to randomize those panels, so I want to obtain those panels. That's like the first step for me. We have those panels. In order to work with them, so in Revit, whenever you tab select the panel, so you come in and you tab, it's selecting the family instance of the panel. Kind of a weird concept to wrap your head around. Luckily in Dynamo, they've taken care of that for us with this node called as family instance. So we're actually able just to automatically convert this to its individual instance. Once again, Monocle lets you align these. So we'll see instead of saying curtain panel, which is a system, Revit system thing, it says glazed, which is the type. So really cool because now we have that to where we can start working with those to modify them. Once again, we're in the Revit category, so we want to select some panel types to assign. So let's go to the selection category. And we'll probably navigate through most of these. You can search, but it's nice to think out that process of how you would work with it. And in Revit, if I were to change this panel type, which I'll change one real quick, I would tab select, which is family instance. I would go to the type selector, and then I would pick a new type. So we're going to mimic that process in Dynamo right now. So in order to select some family types, the easiest way is this little family types drop down. This loads every family type from your current Revit model. I know that mine start with the word panel, so I'll search for those. And we have panel 1, 2, and 3. In Dynamo, if you control copy, you can copy nodes. And with Monocle, you can actually, oh no, it's not gonna. You can actually highlight them and align them right in the canvas. And we'll go ahead and do panel 2 and panel 3. So we're building a selection for us to be able to use. What we're going to do is create a whole bunch of these panels, shuffle them up, and then it'll be compatible in Dynamo Player. So in the past, when we want to do this, we would have to combine this. So we would search for something like list create. If you come from Grasshopper, you would kind of hope that you can add more inputs and things like that. In Dynamo, you can't, so you have to use a list create to combine them into one list, and then we can use all of those to shuffle up and assign them. If you want to do it really quickly, you just select the nodes and then you click this little shopping cart, which is from Monocle, and then you can combine those really quickly too. So I want to work in a bunch of little tips to make you more efficient at Dynamo along the way as well. So now that we have those 3 types, we would need to create a bunch of them to assign randomly to these panels. In Dynamo, if you were to type in repeat or something like that, like a word that means sequence them, you'll start to see some different nodes available to you. The one I use the most is called cycle. And what this does is let you create a whole bunch of iterations, and we'll just double click and cycle it 4 times of those items. So this is really quick to be able to repeat something. A lot of times I'm a little lazy with it, I'll admit it. I'll just search for something that counts things for me because I'm a little lazy once again. I want this to work on any curtain wall. I don't want to always hard code it to 120 panels. So I'll actually let Dynamo do the counting for me, and I'll just make sure I create a whole bunch of options. In our case, 360. That way I'm really good. That way I'm safe. And then we'll just hide these little previews and we'll clean this up a little. So I mentioned we like to group things to be very specific. So if we hover over this, we can make this a background operation and actually tell our user what we're doing. So cycle a bunch of family types, panels maybe. That way they know what's going on. These would be user inputs as well. So we can go ahead and right click and make those inputs. And we could rename them. So we'll do panel 1. That way they can pick other panels. So if you have a user who's like, I have 4 different panels that I want to use and not yours, you can definitely do that. So that's one thing that we would include in this. And the last step would be to make them inputs, which I did, and then I named them. And then I like to keep my inputs kind of over in the same area. Awesome. And then this one, we'll just leave it as background because I don't want to title it right now. So now we've cycled them a bunch of times. They're in the same order. They're going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We can actually shuffle them up. I think if you search for random, this will show up too. Yeah, shuffle. If we search for shuffle though, we have a few options. In Revit 2022, there's an option called seated shuffle, which lets you pick like design options. In Revit 21, that doesn't exist, but Refinery Toolkits has it. So that's actually what we're going to use. So this takes a list as an input and a seed, and we'll cover what a seed is here in a second. So by default, this is in italics. So a new feature of Dynamo 2.6 and up as well is this little italics input. What this means is that it has a default value for us. This default value is currently 1. In order to use this and iterate through this, we can use a slider. In our case, we'll use a number slider. I don't like to use integer slider, and I'll maybe go into that more here in a second. But I typically use a number slider and just change its step to 1. So 0 to 100 at a step of 1. And that's how you change those values to be able to slide through. And we'll put that into the seed, and we'll see that it generated a new option again. So every time I slide it, it's going to generate new options here. This would also be a user input, so we'll just place it over here, right click, make it an option, and we'll rename it option. Now that way our user has a few different inputs to influence this, this design. Cool, so now we've shuffled those up. We have a whole bunch of them, and now we need to take the amount that we needed. So I kind of gave it away, but when we want to take something, a lot of times in Dynamo, just search for what you're wanting to do. So even if you were to search for get, I think it'd find it. But I know I want to take a certain amount from here, so I'll just search the word take, and there's a few options. Take every nth, it's saying that it fetches them at different values. That doesn't sound right. But if I hover over take items, it says fetches a certain amount from the start. So we're going to place that node. So this takes a list as an input and a count for the amount. If we hover, it'll say that it's an integer, an int. That means we need a whole number because I can't take half a panel type. So that's something to keep in mind as your input types. In this case, we'll just reuse the count that's over here to the left. Now we can see that we once again have 120 panel types. So in Revit, when I'm doing this manually through the UI, if I tab select and I pick a new panel type, what I'm doing is I'm setting the type of that instance. That's the way to think, is what are you doing? What action are you doing? When I select something, I'm getting it. When I change it, I'm setting that value in Revit. So we always want to kind of think that way. So using that logic, if I search for set type, we'll have a few different options in my install, for instance. If you don't have the package Clockwork installed, that's one of the must-haves as well. Install that package. If you don't have it, install it, or else your Dynamo life will be a lot harder. Another one's Wombat that's really good, and that one's from Woods Bagot, and that one's a really good package too. I tend to stick with the Clockwork version of this because it's what I've been using for a very long time. So we'll go ahead and place that. This node is to set a type of an instance. So the inputs would be a family instance and a family type. So in our case, if I navigate back, and we'll make this full screen just to make it easier, and we'll see that this graph's not incredibly complicated or large. If I navigate back, we'll see that I have a family instance. If I want to know what kind of data types I'm dealing with, you can actually search for a node called type. It has that little blue level marker looking thing. This will tell you what kind of data type you're working with. Knowing your data type is pretty important in Dynamo, and this object type will really help you with that. So it being a family instance, I know that that can go in there. For family type, we can verify that this is family type. So family type to family type, family instance to family instance. That holds true for most Dynamo nodes. And I'm not going to go ahead and plug this in quite yet because I don't want to keep on changing types over and over. So we've been in automatic run mode the whole time. I tend to work in automatic these days. It's a little scary because Dynamo can crash Revit. Don't be too afraid though. So we're going to go ahead and switch it to manual though for this portion of the example. We'll notice that it didn't do anything, and that's because I now have to press run. So let's go ahead and navigate this. We'll collapse our library, and then graph should be pretty well done. And we'll see what happens when we press run now. So once we press run, Dynamo thinks for a second, and it's going through and tab selecting each family instance and setting the type. So that's really handy because now, as we change options, because we gave our user options, it will go through and create some of those dancing images that you see when someone's working on something. This workflow actually came up on a project that I helped out with years back now, to where we wanted to create a bunch of options to present to the client, and I didn't want to sit here all day tab selecting panels, so we automated it through Dynamo, thankfully. So that was nice. The old saying was Dynamo was my intern for that moment because I just had Dynamo do all the hard work. What's even nicer with this workflow is if I save it and I navigate to my folder, and we'll probably rename it something other than working now. We'll do randomized panels. Not put spaces in my file names. It's like an old habit. I think you can for Dynamo Player. We'll place that in my Dynamo Player folder. Open Dynamo Player, which is under the Manage tab, and we'll see that we have an option here for that graph now. So if I click on this little Edit Inputs button, it will present those inputs to me that I had picked. So for the end user, this is what their experience would be as of Revit 2021 at least. I think this is pretty consistent back to 2018 even with these inputs. So now what we can do is we can randomize that feature wall. We'll kind of scroll through options and hit play. And each time we scroll, it will let us change that option. If you want to be really crazy, you add this to a design option, and then you make your active option the one that you want. So for design option, we would create a new option set and a bunch of new options. And then you would go through and you would add this to all those options. And so like if I want option 1, I would run it with option 1 active, which is primary. Option 2, I want a different one. So we'll make it something else. Well, I got to select the one inside the option. We'll save that one as option 2. We'll do it again on option 3, and then we'll make it another new option. And now as I navigate through options, I've stored those as well. So that's another quick tip for you as you're doing some of these. As long as you're in the design option, you can actually use these graphs that way, which is really, really cool. So yeah, that's kind of that first example. I did mention that this will work on more walls. So I mean, it's a live demo. Why not try it on a whole nother curtain wall that I didn't design it for? So we'll just hit run. And it did run on that whole wall. So since we did build it with that count in it and everything like that, it will remain pretty future proof for an end user. So if their wall's not exactly the same as yours, it should work. So yeah, I hope that I went over everything well. It's a lot of
So
info.
can I ask you a question? Because when you create design options in Revit, so each design option would have a different curtain wall, or is it the same curtain wall in each design option?
Yeah, so it's effectively each option is going to be its own instance. So if we select this curtain wall and then we do IDs of selection, it should tell us that this one's its own distinct instance. So 432, 490. If I switch to another one, that should be different, and that's just because how Revit's handling those.
Right,
so
but Dynamo understands that, so you don't have to reselect the wall every time, or did you have to reselect the curtain wall every time?
Yeah, so I did have to reselect it each time.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, so we'll see that element ID did change right there. So yeah, it's at first I didn't change it, and it was changing the one in the other design option.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind too. I wish it warned you. The design option thing I actually didn't know about until someone on the Dynamo team mentioned it to me for generative design, because they were like, oh, you can create all these studies and pack them into a design option. I was like, oh man, like we barely even used design options for a while there. So like they're useful for kind of saving these things too, which is nice. The other kind of cool thing with this, so let's go back to option 1. If your end user wanted to kind of weigh one option heavier than the other, they just pick it twice. And then if I hit this and run, we'll see that now that option's heavier and we don't have the blue one in this case. So you could do that to where you add more inputs too and kind of add percentages even, and you can go nuts with it. You can do a whole lot of crazy stuff. But yeah, so that's that first example that works within the Dynamo UI and Dynamo Player. So I guess I'll ask it, like, if anyone's used generative design in Revit, which came out in 2021, it's under the Manage tab. Feel free to weigh in. We'll go over an example of making this graph work in generative design now, though, because it covers a lot of really great concepts to expand upon it. So the other thing to keep in mind within Dynamo Player is there's no kind of visualization in here. So there's no kind of visualization in here, so we don't have to worry about that in Dynamo Player. Within Generative Design, and we'll create a study real quick, and then I'll show you how to get to that endpoint. Within Generative Design, which is under the Manage tab, once again, we absolutely have to worry about that preview. And let's not create a study, let's do an Explore. I created one earlier just kind of like to have to show, so we'll show it and then we'll build up to it. So all of this doesn't happen on its own. We have to kind of build this representation for us to be able to use it. So within the data set, the finished product for this is in there with a lot of notes. I also have it on my side screen to kind of remind myself. But we have to be considerate of how we want this to happen. So what's good with generative design is instead of letting the user change the Revit model every time they hit run, they can preview it first and kind of navigate through and see what they like, and then bake that change to Revit. So in this case, if I were to hit create Revit elements on one of these options, it should push that change to probably option 1. I probably messed it up making design options, but once you hit create Revit elements, it will set that to your wall. And let's go ahead and go back past my design option because I don't want to work in a design option in generative design right now. But yeah, as you make those changes, it will update it. And then let's build up to that. So in order to make this happen, we just have to think a little differently in a few ways. We'll actually start with that graph first. So let's see here. Oh, I'm not working in my Dynamo Player folder. We'll open it in manual execution mode for now. This is kind of nice because we just built this together. So this isn't foreign. We just did this. So a lot of this is going to remain the same. The one part that I'm not going to offer up to generative design right now, I'll leave it. I'll leave these family types actually. So I take that back. So what we need to do is right now in Dynamo, we have no preview of what's going on. We'll go ahead and right click and freeze this set type node. That way we don't change them as we're working. That way I can go back into automatic mode. Within Dynamo right now, we have no visualization of what those panels are. We have no clue what they're doing. So once again, if we navigate to Revit, Elements, Curtain Panel, we have a few other nodes in here for us. We have things like boundaries, if it has a plane, if the curtain panels are rectangular, things like that. The quickest way to do this is to just extract its boundaries with that boundaries node. And now if I select this node, click on my background preview and zoom out, I've really quickly extracted those curtain panel boundaries. So this is really nice because that's a lightweight geometry. If I were to do like element.geometry, this is a heavier operation and I just want to render the appearance for the end user to see what's going on. So we don't want to do all of that. So what we'll do is we'll actually create little surfaces from these polycurves. And easiest way to do this is patching it together. So this is kind of a giveaway of a node because we didn't really search for it, but it creates a surface by filling in the boundary that you're giving it. And if you were to type in create a surface, it'd probably find it, even if it's misspelled probably. We have by patch in here. So once again, search for what you think you want to do and it might show you something. So now we have surfaces. Pretty cool. We'll clean up those nodes. We have a bunch of surfaces. In Dynamo, as I'm working forward, I kind of start to hide previous geometry. So I know that I don't want this list to keep on indenting like it is. So I'll typically flatten it out. Flatten in Dynamo 2.0 and up has an amount to it, and -1 flattens it all the way. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So once again, I'll right click and hide previous iterations of that geometry because I don't want them overlapping and doing that flicker thing. So yeah, we'll flatten that. We'll drag this up. And we already have some preview going for our end user to see what's going on. In Dynamo, it's really nice just to obtain this information right from the Revit model as much as you can. So anytime we're working with elements, we'll typically extract data from them within the elements bin. So Revit elements, and we'll search for element. There's all these options in here to query elements, and those are under the question mark. And then action will actually retrieve parameters too. In this case, we want to get the color of those panels that we're trying to set. So that would be a parameter value. So getting parameter value by name will probably be one of your most used nodes if you don't already use it a lot. It's one of my most used nodes. And we'll just actually search for the parameter or the material. In Dynamo, you can double click for something called a code block. A little scary of a name, but if you type in quotes, it lets you type in text values. These are called strings in Dynamo. So double quotes. In this case, we have our materials. Those are elements in Revit, so they get a green element ID. Those are materials. So if we were to go back to our Revit elements bin, we'll see that we have some options in here for material. I want to get the color, so I kind of said that earlier. So we have an option to get the color of a material. So really quickly, we have retrieved that color. So now what we'll do is we want to be able to look up this color by the panel that we're assigning it to. So one of the easiest ways to do this, since everything has an element ID in Revit, is to obtain the element ID of the panels that we're using and associate it with that color. So we're going to use something called a dictionary. I picked this, so this curtain wall example, it might not be something that you'll use immediately back at the office, and I understand that. But I picked it more because of all the concepts that we can cover, and dictionaries are a huge concept. I actually have a video on my site about dictionaries that you can go through as well, but we'll break them down here. So in Dynamo 2.0 and up, we have dictionary as a category, and it lets you build these out. So what it effectively is a way to look things up really easily. This little plus sign means we can create one. So what we have is the ability to create a dictionary by keys. So that's what we look it up with, and the values, which can be pretty much anything. The keys have to be a string. So what we'll do is we'll actually pull this back a bit. We need to give it some keys. I mentioned we want to use the element ID since everything in Revit has that. So we'll actually search for element ID, element.id, and we'll connect our panel types. So now we have their element IDs. If I were to plug this in right into keys and the color into the values, I'd get an error that says it expects these argument types, really technical error. What it means is your data types don't match. So string is what it's expecting, and we're giving it an int. So if you remember from earlier, our data type's an integer. So we actually are able to convert this. We know that we need a string. So if we search for string, we'll see that we have an option for string from object. And this just converts that to a string. And once again, if we use the type node, and I dragged the wrong node, we can see what we're working with. Working with a string versus working with an integer. So now if we plug this in, we really quickly built a dictionary that will retrieve a color, specifically the color of the panel type, by the element ID. Really nice because within the dictionary category, we also have this value at key. So what this lets us do is start to pull those values from this dictionary. So we plug that in, we can now feed in keys, and I'll just feed these in to pull that color back out. So in order to make this work with generative design a little bit better, and we'll save as and name it GDIR for generative design in Revit, is we want to make this a little more friendly in that way. So instead of cycling the actual family types in this case, we're going to cycle the string value of the element ID, or the element ID's integer value. So we'll plug this into the list, and we'll see that that's what we're now iterating through. A little confusing, but it will help us down the road. So we'll kind of clean this up a little. We're crossing a lot of wires here. The sample folder has this done clean with notes everywhere, so just keep that in mind. So yeah, now we're cycling the element ID, shuffling it, and taking some element IDs. Now that we did that, we can place another string and retrieve colors for each panel type that we're actually going to use. This is really important because we can actually render this geometry now in the viewport. So the easiest way to find this node is just type by geometry, and it's the last one on my list right now. What it does is it renders geometry by a given color in Dynamo, and we're going to plug our panel types. We'll hide our previous preview, which is our flatten, and we'll color those right in the viewport. So we retrieve those values from a dictionary. So we built a dictionary, and we looked up those values later on in the graph. Really cool because we're able to provide a preview now to our end user. So now that we've done that, we're actually going to drag this over to the right because we don't want to set the types yet. We are going to need to retrieve those elements given their element ID. So in Dynamo, if we do by ID, I think, there's a few nodes that do this. Clockwork has one as well, and then Wombat has one. If we place this, this will actually let us retrieve items given that element ID. So now I retrieve those family types from Revit's database to be able to use now on this node. This is important because in generative design, I can't feed Revit elements into it. I need for it to work with stuff like integers or strings or anything like that. So that's one thing to always keep in mind. And that's kind of why we're building this graph out this way. Best suggestion is to get in there and try it, and it will start to tell you which nodes you can or can't use. But generally speaking, I like to work this way with generative design. Cool. So now that we have that, we're retrieving those family types, we're coloring the panels, and we're about to set them. One of the cool things with Revit 21, the latest update, is we now have this generative design tab in Dynamo. And if we click on Open Generative Design Tools, we'll see that it starts to help us along the way now. So if we come in here, it tells us that we have some issues with our graph. Reason being, we have nothing that's doing an output. Within generative design, we need something for it to run against or optimize against or randomize against. So we need to always give it an output. A lot of times I'll just use a count if I'm just doing something random. So we'll place a count node, and then I'll place a watch node. That way I can rename it. You right click and you make it an output. In our case, we need it to not be named watch. So we're going to do panel count. That way it has something that it likes. And then if we hit save, it should update. It's also telling us that we need a few more things in here. So in generative design, there is this concept of a remember node. It caches data for you. So we need to do that. So what we need to do, I think it should help us along if I click on these little plus signs. That should have all the remembers I need. And now we have no more issues. So now what we could do is plug this family type in, and we'll unfreeze it. Probably setting these within Dynamo for me already. It's automatically setting them. So if you remember earlier, I showed that little thing that said create Revit elements. We need to add that into here. And that's available under the generative design category. So if we go to generative design, data, we have that remember node that it placed for us, but we also have a node called gate. This node's really special because it lets us close and open a gate, if you will, that tells it to make the change to Revit. So if I switch this out in between those nodes, I'll hit save. We'll see that now as I change things, this is going to get a little. But as I change things, it's just changing in Dynamo and not in Revit, which is faster. So if you're even doing stuff in Dynamo, that gate node's nice because it kind of tells Revit to hold on and not make changes. So that's a big thing in generative design that you will need. So there we go. So now it's kind of waiting for us. Once again, I didn't group while we're live on this because we just want to get through it. The real example has more grouping. In generative design, we are able to give it a description. So randomize panels. We're allowed to assign a thumbnail. So in my case, I think I have one back here. I tend to make them 300 by 300 with a title on them. And then we can create a study type. It automatically creates a study type for you in the folder that you're in, but you can relocate these wherever you want. One thing to keep in mind is these paths cannot be a network path. So the // it can't be those paths. It will create it for you, but you can't load those in generative design. So it's a little misleading, but keep that in mind and you'll be ready for it. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and close this, and then we'll navigate to that folder. I'll actually make a new folder called, let's call it GDIR to make it simple. And we'll look at what it made for us. So these two files called randomize panels _ GDIR were created for us from the tool. It auto publishes it with the thumbnail and with the packages that you used in it. So it bundles it together really nicely for you. This is kind of like what Dynamo Player should be, but it isn't. So it's in generative design. So I hope they bring this into the Dynamo Player eventually. But what we'll do is we'll relocate these in this folder just for cleanliness. And then we'll copy this path and we'll create a new study. So within Revit, we can click on create a new study, add that folder. So this folder could be a network path if it is a drive letter. So keep that in mind too. You can have these loaded on there for your users to use. And we'll select that one. We have our cool thumbnail and we still have our inputs available to us. So we're able to still select panel types, which is really nice. And then the element ID is assigned and cached for us. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I still have the right wall selected just to be safe. And we're going to change this to just be random. We're not optimizing against surface area or anything. If you want to do that, you can. So one example I have on the Dynamo blog recently is changing an umbrella's orientation based on the sun values, the solar values. So you can optimize things based on those criteria within this tool, which is really cool. In this case, we're just randomizing something. So we'll just click randomize and we'll save those as our default settings. And then we'll click on generate. So this is kind of how you test it just to see if it's working too. So sometimes you'll test it and the panels won't appear. So you have to go through and cache those differently. And if they don't appear, we'll have to go look at it on the other graph because I had to manipulate it a bit. So we'll see that we're not getting results here, and that's because we didn't cache the panels. So we'll break that down real quick, and then we'll kind of leave some time for questions too. So in order for it to render those, the tool didn't really do it for me, so I'm going to have to do it. And I'm just opening the graph real quick. See that I'm creating a surface from the elements themselves. It didn't add a remember node for me, so I'm going to go ahead and add one. And I'll hide the previous preview once again, and then we'll hit save and run. It will tell you that it needs to run, so we'll run it. And now we're caching that. So it didn't do that for me, which is a little weird. It should catch that, but this one might not be fully up to date. So now that we've cached those panels, once we're back in Revit, we can create a study again and kind of go through it, and it should work. So it's kind of a little bit of trial and error as well. And I bet you're going to create one with the finished graph if it doesn't want to with this graph. So let's save it. So you got to run it and then save it just to be safe. I'm just hitting run on my other screen. Other folder. And we'll just show it running for you. So there's our graph. We will have it on randomize. We'll make sure we pick the correct wall just to be safe. generate. So now as it's generating, it will be working in the background. Generative Design actually launches 4 instances of Dynamo locally on your machine in the background, and it solves for you, which is really cool. So that's why we get these iterations really quickly. So now as it's running, we're seeing these options start to happen for us. So we can kind of click through, navigate, and explore them and see which one we like. When we like one, we can click on it, click on Create Revit Elements. That gate node opens, and then it sets the panel types for us. So that's what's happening in the background for you within Generative Design. If you were to run some optimization criteria, you could start to filter these down to the options you like too, just by hovering and selecting. So it's really nice. It's kind of like a Dynamo player that's better if you really wanted. You just have to have some output in there. So you can even use this for Dynamo player replacement if you really wanted. And once again, as you change it, you'll start to create those elements. So yeah, in the sample files, that one's really spelled out with notes. The Dynamo player version's in there, and the wall type loader is in there as well. Once again, in order to assist you along the way of creating graphs, one big thing is Monocle's a tool I've been working on quite a bit. It lets you do a whole lot of stuff like these alignments and things. And then the refinery toolkits are a toolkit that is really nice to have in your package list. So yeah, I don't know if there's any questions that popped up. If anyone has questions, feel free to throw them in there. I know we're running right up on time now. So yeah.
Monocle, is that a package? So if you showed that, I might have missed it at the beginning. Is that a package that you just search and install? So cool.
Yep, so Monocle, you can install that right through the package manager. So you search it and you can install it. It will require you to restart Dynamo the first time because it's what's known as a view extension. So it's adding functionality to Dynamo. It's kind of like an add-on to Dynamo. So it has a lot of like those little things in there. So if you were to just kind of go through it, there's a lot of stuff like you can even highlight custom nodes to where it'll actually add a little green outline to them. Once again, it'll actually let you figure out which custom nodes you use, and you can do it a goofy way, or you can do it a more serious way as well. And it tells you node counts. So it has a lot of those kind of things, the groupings in there. Another thing that's really nice that I didn't cover is if you were to be building a graph and using like the categories dropdown. So if I were to build a graph and use categories, which we use all the time, but I don't ever want that to change, if you're between Revit versions, that will change. Monocle actually lets you change these a little easier. So it will convert dropdowns for you automatically if you want it to be hard coded. So in the past, you have to either type that out or find the node, but Monocle will let you do that for most dropdowns that we would use. So like, I think wall types will probably work. I don't know what to type to get that typically, so Monocle will actually hard code that too. So another one that's useful is if you're building graphs for your firm and you're using dropdowns, which are the easiest way to work in Dynamo. If you don't want them to change, you need to hard code them because they will change, and then someone will be on the phone like, "Why doesn't the graph work?" So another question came up about learning Dynamo. Yeah, so in regards to resources for learning Dynamo, I highly suggest any class on Autodesk University or BiLT's resource as well. They're built online. Once again, I learned through Marcello Scambaluri's classes. If you just search for Marcello Dynamo, you'll find him. He has a class called Dynamo for Dummies or Dynamo Essentials, I think. He has a book that covers essentials.
Yeah, we actually had him presenting. We had him presenting 2 events ago. There's the video on our YouTube channel with the link to all of his materials.
Perfect.
Yeah,
that is great. So yeah, go to that link and check him out. And then there's some LinkedIn learning classes that are helpful on there. Ian Siegel is a really great resource, and he has some classes. I think Paul Aubin has a class on LinkedIn learning. Other than that, user groups are great. I'm a huge advocate for conferences because that's where I learned Dynamo, so I think more important than anything is just get in there and try it. And as you're learning too, there's a lot of things like the search isn't great. I'll just kind of say that right now in Dynamo, because if I search for, like, I see a node in Revit 19 called all elements of category, and I try to search it, it's not showing up right now. Like, that sucks if I'm trying to learn Dynamo from scratch. So another thing that even Monocle has is something called simple search. And it's a little more coherent or cohesive between versions. So if I type all elements of category in Revit 19 or Revit 22, I'll see the same thing as the person I'm teaching. The built-in search, you kind of have to get used to what to search for. This just gives it to you how it is. So that's another thing that's kind of useful, is if you start looking at it that way. Another resource is the Dynamo Primer. So dynamoprimer.com, go navigate through that, and that has a lot of great info. And one thing a lot of people don't know is there's Dynamo Learn videos on YouTube. I'll send a link for this after, but there's a whole list of videos on Dynamo's YouTube channel, and they have like all the beginner ones as a whole playlist as well. And I'm not gonna find it right now. But the primer is huge. So primer, and I think it has a link to the videos at the end probably. I'm not going to find it live on the call, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. The Dynamo forum is also very good. I mean, I've asked so many
Yes.
questions in there, and it's amazing how quickly people respond to your questions and really help
Absolutely.
out. So it's a great community.
And that's kind of where I searched first just now when I was searching for the videos, but the forum's great too. So one really big thing that's useful with Dynamo is the sharing aspect. So if you have a question a lot of times and you post it on the forum, it's great because when someone else searches that question, they'll probably find your post that's been answered now. So that's always a great place to go. And people are super helpful on here. This is where I started learning after AU 2014, like I showed on the beginning of the slides. And then I started helping people on here, and that's how I learned a lot, was helping people, because people are like, how do you set type parameters? And I'm like, I don't know how. Let me look at it how. And I learned by helping them. So definitely the forums.
Hi, John. This is Maria. I'm part of the organizers, and I have a question that it's not technically, well, it's not a technical question. It's more personal question, if I may ask. I'm interested to know, you said that when you opened the first time Dynamo in 2013, you were a little bit overwhelmed, and you said, oh, this is not for me. I want to know how different you think your life would have been if you would have actually decided to go with, yeah, no, this is not for me. I'm not going to learn Dynamo.
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. That's awesome. So if I'd never learned Dynamo or programming, so I didn't have a programming background either. When I was like in high school, I built like web pages with HTML and stuff. That's about as far as I got into that stuff. If I wouldn't have learned Dynamo, I was a Revit modeler at a firm, so I'd probably be kind of BIM manager track to where I was still creating Revit models. My education is more of like a drafter. That's kind of where I was at first, as I was someone who was building Revit families and templates for an architecture firm. When I learned Dynamo, it led me to the programming side of things as well, which let me kind of diversify a bit more, So that led me to being a consultant. So we're a third-party consultancy, to where now I'm specialized on something and I work with people all over the place. And I don't know that I would be where I'm at if I didn't start picking up Dynamo, and then also just kind of expand on that coding as well. So another thing in my little presentation was like my timeline. And one of the things in there was I went to a coding boot camp for C#. It was to learn to build web pages. It's a class my wife found for me locally. And I went in there and they were teaching us to build web pages in C#, and I was building Dynamo nodes in C#. So like, I don't even know if I passed the class, but I built a whole bunch of Dynamo nodes and learned C#. But but yeah, it's that's a really good question. But yeah, it's with anything in this industry or in Revit world in general, it's always nice to kind of get a focus on something. I have friends who focus on like solar analysis and energy analysis and rendering and things like that. And just the power of the computer doing all this was really interesting to me. So that's kind of why I latched onto it too. Is I guess I'm just lazy, so I wanted the computer to work for me, right?
Smart lazy, good lazy is what I call that.
There you go.
Thanks
Exactly.
a lot, Jan.
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Okay, I think if there's no more question. Yeah, I think maybe we just end it here. But thanks, John, so much for the presentation. I found it very interesting, and I even learned things that I didn't know before. I'm definitely blown away by the generative design side of things, because I haven't really tried it yet. So I'm keen to start trying now.
Definitely. Yeah. So yeah, get in there and break things and give it a try. And when I first saw it, I wasn't that interested till I started to see what it could do, and I was like, oh, it's kind of cool. So, and thank you for having me on to do this virtually. Hopefully, before too long, we could all be in person again, right?
Yeah. Hopefully, it's a long travel for you to come all the way here.
Oh, it was worth it though. When we went last time, it was so worth it. That was one of the coolest conferences. So.
Do you actually come to New Zealand as well, though, or not? You stay in Australia?
Oh no, just the Australia event. Yeah, so
you need to come to New Zealand.
Yeah, we want to go out there and spend more time next time and actually go around and just explore too. So hopefully next time, hopefully 2022.
Hopefully we can get the BiLT conference here at some point. We're just too far away, I think, for everybody.
No, I gotcha.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank
really.
You.
Cheers.
Awesome.
Bye, everybody.